Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there was relatively little public awareness of how much the world relied on Ukraine for the supply of grain, or how much Europe depended on Russia for its energy supply. Now, as the devastating conflict continues to unfold in the Middle East, some are beginning to wonder what the bigger economic ramifications might be, especially when it comes to the global supply of oil, which could be affected if Iran were to become more embroiled in the conflict. The region is also a key shipping route, with disruption to key waterways like the Suez Canal and the Strait of Hormuz potentially causing delays in deliveries. And earlier, I spoke to Kastem Jetski, chief economist at ING. I asked him what a possible escalation involving Iran could mean for the global supply of oil.
Indeed, I think this is where this conflict will have bigger repercussions for the rest of the world. So just looking at trade is very naive, but oil is an extremely important one. We saw already when the terroristic attacks on Israel started, that oil prices started to surge. If Iran, one way or the other, was to be involved in this conflict, Iran being an important producer of oil, if the entire Middle East would somehow, or one way or the other, be involved in this conflict, with, as a result, maybe even sanctions coming from the US on Iran, on other countries, this would then clearly have a big impact on oil-producing countries. Therefore, we would see oil prices going up. If this conflict was to escalate, we could really see oil prices going above $100 per barrel very easily.
Yeah, and this region is also a key passageway for shipping. What would a disruption to those routes mean for the global economy?
Indeed, you always see, especially the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very important one, not only for oil transportation, but in general for transportation. This would then have an impact, again, especially on oil prices, adding to the upward pressure on oil prices. And I think that is the bottom line here. So one is we don't know anything. I think that's also what all the other conflicts, geopolitical tensions over the last couple of years have shown us. It is impossible to really tell anyone what the direct impact or the explicit impact on growth will be. But what we do know is that there will be, especially when the entire region would be involved in this conflict, there would be a big impact on oil prices. There would be an impact on at least transportation, and that this idea that oil prices could go back to $70 or $80 per barrel would be something of the past, and that we then would have to be prepared for another oil price crisis.
How likely do you think such a scenario is?
In all honesty, I wouldn't dare currently making predictions of how likely such a scenario is. I think what is important is that we know now from whether the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, that also these unexpected events can have huge repercussions, can have a huge impact on the global economy. I think it's also that we're now in this era of overlapping emergencies. Also makes that uncertainty, economic sentiment could weaken further. And so therefore, I would not come up with a prediction how likely such a scenario is. But the last years have really clearly taught us that it's always good to come up with scenarios. The base case scenario is one in which the conflict will not further escalate and we will not get the entire region being involved in this conflict. But clearly, one of the risk scenarios is one with a further escalation and also then, as a consequence, much higher oil prices.
You mentioned the geopolitical ramifications because, of course, this conflict isn't only affecting relations between countries in the Middle East. It could also shape public opinion ahead of next year's US elections. What is your take on the potential long-term consequences?
I think one consequence is something we're already witnessing in Europe, that this conflict could be imported to continental Europe, maybe also to the US. Why? Because we will see that this conflict could lead to some terrorist attacks, as we saw already in Brussels, as we saw in other European countries. So that there will be more of this conflict coming to Europe, coming to the US. What this means is clearly more uncertainty. more uncertainty which will weigh on economic sentiment, but also uncertainty that could make it easier for populist parties, for populist politicians to come up with easy answers. So it's hard to tell what this now really will mean for the presidential election in the US. I think what it will mean is we will have even more polarized debates, not only in the US, but also in Europe. And I hope that we will clearly see also more support now for the Western world, still coming out of the US, coming out of Europe, because the risk clearly is that such a conflict that we're currently seeing will have bigger repercussions if it is exported to Europe and to the US.
Do you think governments should be taking any specific measures to prepare for potential economic turmoil?
I think governments have been, of course, in this emergency fighting mode already for a couple of years right now. It is very hard to prepare. What governments should be prepared to do is that they should not be hesitant to use fiscal stimulus, to use any kind of support measures to cushion a potential downfall of the economy. I think that is something that every government should have learned now over the last couple of years. Be prepared that there will be more fluctuation. We are living in a more volatile environment, so which will also mean more ad hoc, more prompter fiscal policy action in order to cushion the impact from these potential geopolitical events on the economies.
All this volatility, of course, leads to a whole lot of anxiety. We've recently seen a rise in the price of gold as people seek safe places for their money. Tell me about the role that fear plays here.
Fear plays an enormously important role. It is that all people, all of us, you and me included, so we're now coming out of a period of pandemic, of supply chain frictions, of war in Ukraine, which is still going on. Now we have another conflict in the Middle East with potentially an impact and repercussions on the rest of the world. So this is clearly now, adding to all the fears that people are having. And it is more as a human reaction to try to find some kind of safe haven. I even forgot to add the entire discussion about climate change that we're having. So this is really an enormous, uncertain environment for all people, for all governments, for all policymakers. And it's a normal reaction then to, go into safe havens like gold, like government bonds. We also know, and I think that is the horrible thing about financial markets, that financial markets love to then move on and forget about the ongoing conflicts, which could mean that in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months from now, we will see again more risk-taking behavior. But in general, I think we will have to accept that we're living in a more volatile, not only political, but also economic environment.
Carsten Pszczewski, Chief Economist at ING. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.